We are looking at Artemisia Gentileschi's Judith and Holofernes, also known as Judith slaying Holofernes, from around 1614. I've seen it as early as that. This one has its dated to 1620 to 1621. And this is not the only Judith and Holofernes scene that Artemisia does. She has a few of these. And so this is a theme that she goes back to time and time again. Now, Artemisia is really important for the fact that she's one of the very few female artists we actually know the name of. We know works by her. We have letters from her. We actually know a fairly good amount about Artemisia and her life and what happened and the struggles she faced, which is very, very unusual. And so she's a very important character for us to look at, very important artist for us to look at. Now, how is it that she as a female rose up to the status and was well known during her time, her lifetime as a major artist? Now, most women would not have been trained. They would not have been able to get into the bodega system. They wouldn't have been able to work underneath a master artist. So they wouldn't have been trained in how to mix paints, how to make paints, how to make your canvases, how to paint your underpaintings. None of that would have been taught to them. But Gentileschi had an advantage, and that was that her father was a painter. And so she could work for him and learn a lot of the tricks in the trade, learn composition, how to construct a painting, the types of things she would need to do in order to be a successful artist. And she showed potential. She showed natural talent, and so her father did train her. He even got other artists to train her as well. And so this really sets Gentileschi out from other female painters of this day. If you could not get trained by a family member, if you were a female and you wanted to paint but you couldn't get trained by a family member, you were generally going to paint things like puppies or flowers, landscapes, still lifes, something that really kind of within the Italian understanding of painting really didn't matter. No one really cared about still lifes and puppies and things like that. And so here with Gentileschi, capable of painting history paintings, that is, a subject with a historical background or mythology or religion or some sort of story connected to historical, quote-unquote, historical events. This is what makes her a great painter, because that is what the guys were doing. If you were going to make your name as an Italian painter, you needed to be painting history paintings, and that's what she does. And so what we're looking at is actually a story that comes from the apocryphal Bibles. And these are stories that are outside of the canonical Bible, the canonical books of the Bible. And the story goes that Holofernes is this general, and he brings his army to bear against Judith's city, and no one knows what to do. How are they going to save themselves? How are the Jews going to prevent their city and their population from being completely annihilated? No one has any clue. And Judith comes up with a plan, and she goes out to the army and she meets Holofernes, and she uses her feminine charms to gain audience in his tent, and they dine and they eat, and Holofernes drinks too much, so much so that he passes out. And this is when Judith finds the moment where she will be able to save her people. And she takes his big long sword, which we can see in the middle of this image right here. Let's zoom into that. And she gets her maidservant that she's brought with her. So this is her maidservant. This is Judith. She picks up the big long sword and she takes Holofernes by the hair and drags the sword through his neck, assassinating him and freeing her people. And if you look at this, Gentileschi is unafraid of bringing the drama. She is all about painting a very dramatic scene. I mean, we've got blood spurting everywhere, and this almost decapitated head is the center of attention. So if we start to look at how she's compositionally put this scene together, his head, with all the blood spurting out, is the center of attention. So let's take a look. Now, she's done a couple things in order to pinpoint that that is really where the action is. And a couple of things are the dramatic diagonals that she's used. So if we go from Judith's shoulder on down through, we've got one dramatic diagonal. And if we go from Holofernes' knee through his body. We've got another one, and those intersect at his head. Then if we look at the maid, and we go from the maid's arm or Holofernes' arm on down through, and we continue through the blade of the sword, we've got another dramatic line going through the composition. So she has intersected all these diagonals and vertical lines, pinpointing the action at this bloody moment where, Holofernes is losing his life. And losing the fight. We can see it's almost as if he just woke up to realizing he's being attacked, and he's only kind of able to push his arm up and almost get to the head of the maid, but he's a little too late, and Judith has already been able to slice through and lose his life. Now, there's a couple other things compositionally that we need to look at, which also helps to stabilize this composition. Not only is it active because of the diagonals, but it's also very stable. And one of the things that gives you a stable composition is using triangles. And so if we look at the head of the maid, and we go down to the corner of the bed, and we go along the bed and back up to the head of the maid, we have a triangle. And not only that triangle, but she also has an inverted triangle as well. So if we go from Judith's shoulder to Holofernes' head, up to his knee, and back over, we have a second triangle. So she's interlocked these two triangles with a bunch of diagonal lines, pinpointing right where she wants you to look. So it's very stable, but it's also very active. Now, she's also pinpointed where she wants you to look because she's using tenebrism, which is an effect that is based off of Caravaggio and the way that Caravaggio paints. And so we can see how dark, this shadowy manner that she's using, with this intensely bright light shining down on the action, illuminating this very narrow picture plane. I mean, everything is in our space. It is almost as if we are sitting at the foot of the bed watching Holofernes be slain. So she's pushed everything up into our space. She's blackened out all the background. She's got this intense light shining down, which allows for this intense chiaroscuro, this intense modeling on the skin, and it really kind of shows up her proficiency in painting. Now, the other thing I want to point out is her ability to paint textiles. I mean, these things are amazing. If we look at Holofernes' bed sheets, that looks like red velvet. And I'm going to zoom in real quick to another part of his bedding. If we look at this blanket with this kind of frayed edge, I mean, it looks just soft, and you kind of like touch it almost as if it gets furry. And then if we go up to Judith's clothes, you can see there's this wonderful brocade on the front of her garment and on the sleeves, which really shows that Artemisia really has an understanding of fabrics and patterns, and is really capable of painting beautiful detail. We can also see that in her bracelet that she's wearing, and actually in the middle of these, let me see if I can get a little closer, we can see little figures. So this tiny detail, and in the way the light is hitting on the metal, it really kind of makes it kind of sparkle. And this is really just amazing detail that she gets into the painting. Even though overall it doesn't look as though there is much to the painting, because it's very simplistic, even though it's very dramatic. But once we really start to get into the painting, there's really a lot of dramatic detail we can look at, from the textures of the different textiles to the fact that the flesh really does look like flesh and hair and kind of this fur going down the edge of that blanket. And she's even kind of pared down and simplified the color palette. There's not a lot of color in this. She's really kind of used red, yellow, and blue primary colors. I know it's kind of hard to tell, but if you could see the maid's garment, it's a bluish hue. And so we've got this kind of golden color of Judith, the blue on the maid, and then the red on Holofernes. And so simplistic setup, simplistic color palette, but very complex in the way everything in this scene is woven together to be very dramatic and really show off the fact that Gentileschi is a master of the Baroque.